Now, how many of y'all have ever heard the statement, there's no harm in asking, okay? I was raised with there's no harm in asking. Some of you don't adhere to that. My wife gets embarrassed frequently because I live out there's no harm in asking. I'm always asking, hey, how about a free upgrade? Hey, how about, why not a discount? When I bought my groomsmen and usher gifts like 29 years ago, I was at a national department store. I said, hey, this is for my wedding. I'm buying 10 of them. They're for ushers and groomsmen. How about a discount? And the lady said, you know what? I can't give you a discount because you're buying 10. But since it's for your wedding, I'll give you 10% off. I was like, score. There's no harm in asking, right? Sometimes the answer is no. We were visiting our nation's capital back in the fall, and we were taking a tour of Mount Vernon. Unbelievable tour. John Marshall was our tour guide. We weren't in the group that had to stay behind the rails and stuff. We were with this guy, John Marshall. He was the guide of guides. He was an incredible tour guide, awesome guy. In fact, one elementary school age child asked if he knew the Washingtons. He was that old, but not quite that old. But John promised us that he was gonna give us the best tour. We had a little golf cart, we were riding around, and we got to go up to the cupola, the top, the little peak of Mount Vernon. No one else got to do that. There were stairs that went straight up. It was a little bit scary. The wood was like 300 years old. And we got to go up there and see it. And he said, I promised you, top to bottom, I'm gonna show you Mount Vernon. And so then we went down and we went outside down to the river, and we were about to get in the golf cart and leave kind of the housing part of it. And I said, John, what are those doors there? And he goes, well, those are the doors to the basement. I said, well, let's go. And he said, I think Nicolas Cage is still down there from National Treasure 2. And I said, John, you promised us top to bottom. That's the bottom because there's no harm in asking, right? He looks at me like I'm crazy and then reaches in his pocket and pulls out a key, radios to security and says, we're going to the basement, opens up the door, and this is the basement right there. Not everybody gets to see. That's the basement of Mount Vernon. Why? Because there's no harm in asking. And the three people who were with me that were embarrassed because I kept asking, they were like, hey, thanks for asking, Stephen. That was awesome. We got to see the basement of Mount Vernon. No one else got to see that. That wasn't part of the tour. Well, this morning we want to start off with this premise, and I want you to not to judge this woman because there's no harm in asking, right? Matthew 20:20, we have a woman who asks a question. It's a bold question, and it leads into a principle that is going to deepen everyone's understanding of what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to be as Christ followers. Matthew 20:20, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, we'll call her Miss Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, what do you wish? She said to him, command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit on the right and one on your left. But Jesus answered, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? So here you have a mom who boldly walks up with this mentality of there's no harm in asking. I'm gonna ask Jesus that when he establishes his kingdom, they didn't know what that meant. Was it a political kingdom? Was it a military kingdom? They had no idea that it meant an eternal kingdom. She says, I have two of my sons, they've been following you, they're part of the 12, James and John. How about one of them sit on your right, one of them sit on your left? It's a bold request. Now, if we go with the premise, there's no harm in asking, we go, okay, she's okay. Now, if you look at it in context, Jesus had just said, I am about to go and suffer and die to establish my kingdom. I'm about to experience more pain and separate. What I'm about to experience, no person has ever experienced. So maybe her timing was poor. By the way, Jesus, can my sons sit on the left and the right? Not the right time. But what was her request? Her request is every parent's request. Man, I want my sons to be great. I want them to have a position. I want them to have esteem. I want them to be liked and remembered. I want them in a position of greatness. Now, I am for pursuing greatness. I think we all ought to set high goals. We ought to have people around us who are gonna challenge us to greatness. When I was a child playing basketball in my driveway, I never thought, man, I wanna be the third best. I sat out there and played scenarios of March Madness and being the greatest, not on the court, not on the team, but the greatest. When I caught from my brother in our backyard, he was 3 years older than me, still is, consequently. But he was a left-handed pitcher and I was a catcher and I didn't have shin guards or a face mask, so I learned how to catch early. I thought, you know what, I'm gonna be the greatest catcher. I'm gonna be Johnny Bench. That's who I wanted to be. Some of y'all are gonna have to ask your parents or grandparents who that is, but he was great. We strive for greatness. But you know what? God is going to define. Jesus is about to define for us because of this question that Miss Zebedee asked. He is about to define greatness for us. Read what Scripture says, and we're going to get it to it. It says, but Jesus called them to himself in verse 25 and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Key verse, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus defines what it means to be great. According to Jesus, greatness is to be a servant. Greatness is to be a servant. This is an upside down concept in our culture. Our culture says greatness means position and status and possession. Greatness means having the most followers. Greatness means promoting yourself. Greatness means never having to pick up a piece of trash or do a menial task. Greatness means you have people for that. And Jesus says, no, you want to be great in my kingdom? It's not sitting on my right hand or my left hand. For James and John, it's the servant. You're gonna be a slave. You're gonna be a bondservant of all. Nothing is below you. Nothing is above you. You're gonna serve others. That's how you become great. I think as a boy in my driveway or in my backyard, dreaming of greatness in a sport, there was no concept of I'm gonna be last in order to be first. I'm gonna be a servant in order to become great. Jesus establishes this principle, and it is not the act of serving, but it is the attitude and lifestyle of being a servant. That's different. You could all go and serve somebody today, one single act. You can all go out and do a great act, a benevolent act of kindness. That doesn't make you the servant that Jesus is really setting the bar. It's not becoming great in his kingdom. It is a lifestyle. It is who you are as a Christ follower. It is what we are called to be and not simply do. See, this Christian life is not doing, it's being. You don't go to church and that make you a Christian. You don't pray and that makes you a Christian. That is who you are as a Christian. And because of who you are, those things come naturally. Of course, that's what you do. And Jesus is gonna tell us, if we're gonna become great in his kingdom, if we're gonna be esteemed, if we're gonna be applauded, if we're gonna hear those incredible words, well done, my good and faithful what? Servant. That is his calling, that is his challenge, that is who we need to be as Christ followers. Servants. And then I love the way that he does this, but I wanna look at three things that really a servant does. The first thing, a servant submits. The world says you rule, you dominate, you lead, you take your authority and you rule with an iron fist. You boss people around and that gives you greatness. Jesus says you submit. He doesn't say you give up any status that you have or any position that you have. You just simply look at a situation and you serve. That's what we're called to do. Not giving up anything, not belittling ourselves. And he gives us the greatest example. I think he gives us really what it is to submit. It means humility and selflessness. If you're selfless, if you're humble, that's what it means to submit. It doesn't mean that you're less than anyone else. It means that you're willing to humble yourself, to submit yourself, to approach a situation or a task or a person in great humility. I think the greatest example of this is the night that Jesus was betrayed. In the upper room, he does what I think is the single greatest act of humility in all of human history. He goes into the upper room. It was a room that was borrowed for them to observe the Passover. And typically, if you went into somebody's house, there would be a household servant. And the first thing that the lowest of low of the servants would do is wash the guests' feet. Well, because this was an upper room, it was a man cave, if you will. That he went up there wasn't a servant that was assigned to this room. It was an extra room. And so Jesus gets there, all the disciples get in the hustle and bustle of preparing the Passover, getting ready. They're excited about what's coming ahead of them. Jesus looks around and no one has washed feet. And so Jesus, the perfect Son of God, the Messiah who is about to go to the cross, looks around, no one's doing it. So he gets on his hands and feet, gets a basin, a towel, and he starts washing the disciples' feet. Did he give up his position? Absolutely not. He submitted himself in great humility and great selflessness and got on his hands and feet. And there's John, there's Thaddeus, and there's Bartholomew, there's Peter. Peter's gonna talk and put his foot in his mouth, but Jesus is gonna correct him. That's just what Peter did. And then there's Judas. Why do I think it's the single greatest act of humility? Because the Son of God, on his hands and feet, washed the feet of the betrayer. The man who hours later would kiss him and betray him and turn him over to the Roman guards and ultimately be the one responsible for his crucifixion. Jesus washed his feet. That's submission. That's humility. That's a selflessness that models for us. And when he gets done with all 12, he says, you know what I've done? You go and do likewise. He doesn't mean wash feet, he means serve. Because that's what we do. We submit. We are selfless in the way that we approach situations and people and tasks. Nothing is beneath us when we're following Christ's example. We have to submit. The servant, I love this, the selfless, submitting servant sacrifices. That selfless, submitting servant, he's gonna sacrifice. That's exactly what Jesus says in Matthew 20:28. Not only did I not come to be served, but I come to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. If you're gonna truly be a servant of God, it's gonna sacrifice. Now, I'm not talking about crucifixion on a cross. I'm not even talking about being a martyr. I'm talking about you sacrificing what is convenient, sacrificing what is easy, sacrificing what is in your comfort zone, and you sacrifice to serve. Service opportunities never come at convenient times. You could be in the middle of something on the way to a meeting with your mind wrapped around something. You could be so excited about a task and you see a need. And then you have to realize if I'm a submitting, selfless servant, I've got to sacrifice. Maybe sacrifice my time, maybe sacrifice my talents and my abilities, maybe sacrifice my funds. But there's an opportunity for me to put aside what I want to do and do what Christ is calling me to do as a servant. And oftentimes that's pulling you out of a comfort zone. We went on a mission trip, 2 in a row. There was this mission trip we went on and we built this house to be a ministry tool. And I took a student named Luke on this mission trip, and he could literally build anything. He could have built the building on his own. He was so skilled at carpentry, and he understood tools. Before he had his driver's license, he was driving a backhoe that cost about $500,000. He was just skilled in that area. The following year, we went to Ecuador. We weren't building anything. We were out doing drama because we didn't speak the language. We did this drama and acted out the story of the gospel for all these kids and these adults in these communities. And he got partnered with all these kids from all over the United States, and somebody said, hey, we need somebody to be the lead role in this drama. And there wasn't anything dramatic about Luke. Give him a tool he felt comfortable. Give him a drama script. He was a fish out of water. And he looked around and waited for these kids who probably that was their comfort zone. And because he knew that he was called to be a servant of God, step out of his comfort zone and sacrifice. He goes, I will. And he said, Stephen, I'm bad. I said, I know you're bad, Luke. But in your weakness, God will be made perfect. And people came to know Christ, and God used him in his sacrificing, stepping out of his comfort zone, and doing dramas God's kingdom was built. How is God calling you out of your comfort zone? How is God calling you to sacrifice and step into the role of serving? Maybe it's rocking a baby once a month in our nursery. That's serving. Maybe it's teaching a second grade classroom and help herding those cats and teaching them the truths that are found in God's word. Maybe it's serving somewhere where you never thought, in our parking lot or as a greeter because you can smile and greet people. God is calling us not to act out a single act of service, but to be servants, to be selfless, submitting, sacrificial servants as a lifestyle. And when we step out of that comfort zone, God can use us in a tremendous way. And you know what? When we're out of our comfort zone, you know what happens? We don't take the credit. Luke, if he'd have built a building, he'd have said, yeah, I'm a good builder. People would have said, man, look at Luke. He's so great at building. But using him in a drama, he said, it's nothing but God. But God. And when we do that, when we're faithful, God can use us and grow us and build his kingdom as we're faithfully following him as a servant of Christ. A selfless, submitting, sacrificing servant serves. A selfless, submitting, sacrificial servant should serve. Now that seems just logical, right? But you know, in the Bible it says that for freedom we have been set free. Makes sense, but we need to say it. It says the scoffers scoffed. Of course, that's what they do. Modern terms, haters hate, right? Servants serve. It's not enough just to have the apron or the t-shirt or the hat that says I'm a servant. We must put our action where our heart, where our attitude, where we're called to live. Servants serve. And who do we serve? We serve in any opportunity. We serve everyone where we see issues, where we see needs. We step out and we serve. And that is key for us because we don't know who we're serving, but when we serve the least, we serve Jesus. He says in Matthew 25, they're asking him about this, and he says, you know what, I'm gonna separate the sheep from the goats. They said, well, how do we know the difference? He said, the ones you serve are the ones you don't serve. He said, there's gonna be hungry people and thirsty people and people that need clothes and people that need a tire changed and people that need a meal brought to them and people that need a lawn mowed. And this is what he says in Matthew 25:45. He says, then he answered them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did not do it to serve, that's what he's talking about, to one of the least of these, you did not do it for me. Just prior, he said, for everyone you serve, the least of these, you're serving me. So when you look at that person on the side of the road, instead of going, man, they should just get a job, or you see that person that's hurting and go, well, they just keep making bad decisions, of course they're hurting. You see that person that's struggling or that yard that needs mowed and you go, man, they ought to get up there and mow the yard. You don't know the circumstances that family is living under. Instead of looking and pointing and judging, we serve. And God promises us this. When we rock that baby in the nursery, we're serving Jesus. When we feed someone at a homeless shelter, when we together as a church next month go and serve all over Houston in so many different projects and serve Houston, we're serving Jesus himself. He says, when you choose to serve, you serve me. To the least of these, that child or that person that seems marginalized in our society. That's Jesus. And when we forget, when we pass up those opportunities, when we refuse to serve, we're refusing to serve Jesus. We have to model servanthood. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. What do we need to do? Not only do we need to serve so that we're serving Jesus, we need to serve to set an example. I can tell you that when we serve the circles of influence that are around us. Lots of people I know, when we look at the circles of influence up here, you have family in the middle. Then you have your church. We're called to serve the body of Christ. And when everyone is serving, this body functions so well. And then we're called to serve our neighbors and then strangers. I know people that are really good at serving strangers. They have no idea how to unload the dishwasher. They're really good at serving a coworker or a neighbor. They're real quick to take a meal to someone who's hurting and in need. But yet, there's people in their family that they're neglecting. I don't know what the scientific proof, but it's scientific. It's more fun to mow your neighbor's yard than your own, right? I can remember when my dad voluntold me as a kid we had to go mow the senior adults that lived across from us, mow their yard. I always felt a little bit more rewarded mowing their yard than mowing mine. Sometimes it just makes us feel better to serve a stranger than our own spouse or kids or parents. But we're called to be servants. And parents, we need to serve and we need to model that serving, and then we need to teach our children to serve. If you are having to give a crash course exam on how a wash machine and a dryer works the week before your kids go to college, you've failed. People call them chores. We call it serving. Helping to unload the dishwasher or do yard work or to clean. Those are areas that we are called as Christ followers to serve. And not simply the strangers and the neighbors in the church. We're called to do that at home. How can I be a Christ follower serving God in every circle of influence that I'm involved with? Yes, I need to serve the students at school, my teammates, my coworkers, the strangers. But how can I roll up my sleeve and do something out of the ordinary to serve at my home, at my church? Where are areas where I can grow in the area of service? Now, a selfless, submitting, sacrificing, serving servant. It's wordy. I don't expect you to remember that. We need kind of a term for this selfless, submitting, sacrificing, serving servant. I got it. Why don't we call it a Christian? That's what Christians are. That's who we are. It's not what we do, it's who we are. And when we see a need, we meet a need. When we see somebody in need, we serve that person in need. We need to be looking for opportunities to live out Matthew 20:28. If Jesus the Messiah didn't come to be served and to look around and say, I've got people for that. But no, I've got a need in front of me and I'm gonna meet that need. If Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, said, I didn't come to be served, but I'm gonna serve. I'm gonna get on my hands and feet and wash feet. I'm gonna go to the cross so that people can see what it means to be sacrificial in the way that I serve. How can we, as Christ followers, model that? It's not something we do, it's who we are. And we have a church that loves to give everyone an opportunity to serve. We have so many opportunities throughout the year to serve the local body, to serve our community, to serve our church so that we can grow deeper in our relationship with Christ and we can cast a broader net and grow in the amount of people that we're reaching with the truth and the gospel and the purpose and the peace that is only found in Jesus Christ. That's what happens when we serve. Serving is evangelism. Now, you may have to explain to someone what Jesus did in the resurrection, but the way that you can really turn people's heads, the way that you can be different than the world, because the world is saying, serve me, serve me. It's about me, it's about authority, it's about position. The way that we can stand apart, swim against the current of our culture is to be a servant. And when you do that, people will see something different in you. Christianity for the first couple centuries was underground. It was hated, it was persecuted. Most of Christianity was disliked by the government, disliked by the religious establishment, and it was persecuted above any other group. And you know what? It wasn't a great revival. It wasn't a great preacher. It wasn't a great Bible study that really put Christianity on the map. It was the fact that there was a plague that came. And in the plague, everyone treated the people who got the plague like they were unclean, and they would cast them out and leave them for dead. And it was the Christians who understood Matthew 20:28. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. They said, you know what? I'm gonna serve, I'm gonna submit, I'm gonna sacrifice. I'm gonna reach out, even if I get the plague and die. I'm called to love my neighbor. I'm called to serve my neighbor. And Christians started loving and serving and treating these people with the plague. And the world noticed when no one else, no other religion, no other political entity would serve these sick folks. And the Christians, from the love of Christ and a servant attitude, loved and served these dying people. People started saying, I want that. That's amazing. That's sacrificial. That's like nothing else I've seen. Man, we have lots of plagues in our culture today. We have lots of untouchables. We have lots of people and tasks that people go, I don't want to do that. That's beneath me. There's no way I would do that. How brightly we would shine if we started looking at those menial tasks and serving with a cheerful attitude, with a sacrificial and submitting spirit, with a selfless attitude, and say, this is for the glory and the name and the kingdom of Jesus Christ. How Christianity in our culture would explode if we simply served